Martin, I'm happy to ask you, what's good and what's bad. But first of all, respond to Alexander there. So Europe just likes to regulates before stuff happens. It's just it's the mentality that's different in Europe than in the United States. Was that fair? Is it fair?
I'm not sure it's true, actually. If you look at what happened with the crisis in 2008, we had to recognize that some things should have been regulated and had not been sufficiently well regulated and overseen before the crisis. So that's why we had to tighten a number of screws in our regulatory framework to have something that is more stable and conducive to growth. The Americans were in the same situation, but it is an example to say that we don't necessarily over-regulate. And if we look at what's happening now, I can think of many examples where actually, at least at the level of the Commission, we prefer to see how a given market segment develops rather than trying to regulate it from scratch. If I look at crowdfunding, if I look at private placement, if I look at loan originating funds, these are good examples where we see nascent markets, we see initiatives sometimes of a regulatory nature at national level, but our approach is rather cautious. We don't want to fossilize these markets before they have taken off. But it is very often a difficult trade-off, because if you wait for a big cross-border scandal of whichever nature creating investor detriment, this can kill the market as well. And of course, people will immediately turn to the Commission, asking the Commission, what have you done? Why haven't you regulated the subject? So it's a difficult trade-off, but we do our best to address it in a balanced manner. On reasons for hope, thinking about third country investors, well, investors want growth, obviously. And that Europe cannot offer to the same extent as developing countries for obvious structural, cyclical, and maybe even secular reasons. But we can offer a number of things, even though we, of course, are going through difficult moments right now. We nevertheless have stable countries with highly qualified workforces where the rule of law applies. I think third country investors like that. We also have, in general, looking at the financial services area, I think a high-quality regulatory framework. Not everything is perfect. There are probably inconsistencies between various pieces of legislation. There may be some gaps. There may be some areas where we've gone too far with the recent reforms. But on the whole, if you look at UCITS, if you look at IFMD, if you look at accounting and many other areas, we have a regulatory framework which is really highly respected in the world, which is sometimes seen as a model that third countries want to replicate. And we are working hard to further improve it with, right now, the call for evidence, which has been launched by the Commission and which aims at identifying inconsistencies and possibly weaknesses in our regulatory framework so that it becomes even more fit for purpose. So that's a second reason of hope, I would say. And a third reason has to do with the new momentum that we are observing in Europe with the Juncker Commission, thanks to the investment plan, thanks to the Capital Markets Union project. There is really a strong willingness to make sure that the financial sector not only delivers stability and consumer protection, but that it also really serves the economy, that it really serves growth and job creation. So if you look at financial services regulation over the last years and even decades, it's very much focused on making sure we have a stable framework. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. The crisis shows it. But now, with the Capital Markets Union project, with the investment plan, we really want to link the financial sector to the wider economy. And with the Capital Markets Union project, we go through the funding escalator of companies, trying to understand the financing problems that they have, the bottlenecks that affect them, to see how we can link the financial system better to the companies in order to serve their needs and allow them to grow. So there are, reasons for hope. I genuinely believe it.
Alexander, you want to jump back in?
Yeah, I have no disagreement with him in general. I mean, as investors, we need stable and prudent regulation. And there are a number of examples where on a global basis, I think Europe can be quite proud. Just take the UCITS regulation. 2 days ago, I listened to somebody from the SEC, and they say you are far ahead with regard to UCITS regulation compared to our mutual fund regulation in the US, where we don't have any liquidity requirements and so on. But now, my point is a different one, and I reflect on Mr. Oettinger's speech. And let me take this one example to provoke a little bit. When Bill Gates and his friends were in their garage starting Microsoft one day, there was nobody from Washington coming and telling them, and these are the rules, how you have to develop this software and how do you have to set up this job. What I mean, Europe needs innovation. That's absolutely clear. And I'm not talking about the financial system right now, so it's not his turf. I'm talking about innovation in Europe, which is important also from the investor's perspective. And therefore, you need some freedom first, and then you start regulating this, because there might be risk involved. Now they start pushing Apple and others.
Yeah, Isabel, go ahead.
If that's okay, no, I mean, it's always a nice comparison between US and Europe, but I think there's also a reality, which is there's a lot more grassroots innovation taking place in the US than in Europe. And in Europe, you have challenges that just don't get resolved by market itself pulling up its sleeves and getting to work. And so this is a framework in which, again, by culture and tradition, there's more reliance on the public authority to help sort out the problems. And I'll give you one very concrete example. Europe is dominated by not just SMEs, we saw the numbers earlier, but micro enterprises, minuscule enterprises that have no hope ever of issuing a corporate bond or something. And in this framework, this is an enormous structural hurdle to the development of large capital markets in Europe. And this is somewhere where perhaps it would make sense for the Commission, some combination of the digital economy part and the regulation to say, okay, can we help create structures that facilitate pooled fundings for companies that are very small in and of themselves, but maybe if they get together, you can come up with some market-based financing that makes sense for this particular structure of industries and companies that Europe has.
I bring in Dieter here because I think it sort of relates partly to what you do. I mean, there is this sort of I don't know whether it's a true or but the sense that if you're looking for capital, you're okay in Europe for the first chunk of it. If you're a startup, you can get maybe 8, 9, 10 million euros. If you want more than that, it's like the second take. That's the point in Europe at which entrepreneurs start looking to the US, because they know there's a big market there. They can get $100 million, they can get $300 million, and that's really hard here. Is that a fair assessment? And what can be done about it?
No, it's absolutely right, Stephen. It's very good that you're raising it, because indeed we have a lot of seed funding in Europe. There are so many regional government program, on national level, on a European level. So I think that is working quite well. So I think it's also, and I think we have many entrepreneurs. And if you look at young people, they have role models by now, and so becoming an entrepreneur and starting their own firm is not something completely unusual anymore. I think it's becoming becoming more and more the norm. But what we actually, to put it very drastically, we don't need any more startups, but we need scale-ups. We need those companies, and we need, to foster companies that have the ability to really become the champions of tomorrow and to really make it through the roof. And they need indeed more funding, and they probably need also a different, maybe a slightly different regulatory environment. And many of these companies find that in the US indeed. And so the risk is clearly there that they might go over to the US. And this is why, again, venture capital comes in, and maybe then also growth capital at some point, other ways of funding and being able to pay for the larger checks. To make those companies, to create another Skype, to create another Spotify. So we do have examples of unicorns, as they are called, companies over $1 billion valuation. We have them in Europe, but of course not as many as in the US. And I think this is what the Capital Markets Union is trying to tackle it. And Martin mentioned it early in his speech, the initiatives around venture capital. We think that is going in the very right direction. It just takes time. And we are like about 15 years behind the development with regards to venture capital than in the US. And so we have reasons to be optimistic there as well. It takes time.
Yeah, I guess the problem, you get to $1 billion and then a big US company buys you up. But
on
maybe
the other
a European one. Maybe even a European company.
I was in the US only 2 weeks ago in the Valley, in the Bay Area, and there was a company founded by a German there 3-4 years ago, and he's now taking that company back to Germany, south of Berlin, to Halle. Whoever knows who's German here knows Halle an der Saale is not really a booming area, and it doesn't sound, like, wow, this is but he's taking that company. Yes, but he's taking that back, and he told me
it will become gloomy now.
He's finding the right expertise there. He's finding the engineering talent in Halle an der Saale that he needs for his company, and so he is now and he says the labor costs are so much lower than in the Bay Area, and so this is an example why Europe, yes, we have the right environment also to host companies like this.
I guess there are other things too, that are outside the remit of this panel, but the number of 49 people companies, in France and Belgium and that kind of thing, just because if you get to 50, the social payments are so much bigger. There are these other sort of big structural things too. But I think, Martin, you had an observation you wanted to make on something said earlier.
Yeah, I was going to make the same point, actually, that I'm not sure we lack innovation in Europe. I'm not familiar with innovation indicators that allow you to compare countries, but I think we have a lot of innovation in Europe. The question is how we make it grow. And financing is one part of the response. We want to make sure that at each stage of its potential development, a company in Europe can find the right types of financing solutions that it needs. That's what the Capital Markets Union project is largely about. But I recognize, of course, that it's going to be a while before we get to where we want to get. And also, financing is only a part of the solution. As you rightly said, there are other structural rigidities that have to be addressed, sometimes at European level, but as we all know, very often also at the national level.